I'm Abi Mellor, Managing Director of MOREVER. I'm the host of Leading Lights, the podcast for women in the charity sector. Hi Eleanor, thank you for joining us on Leading Lights. It's lovely to meet you. You're Eleanor Harrison, OBE, the Chief Executive of Fairtrade Foundation.
Yeah, lovely to be here.
Thank you. Eleanor, we always start with the same question. I ask people to take me back to their earliest memory. What's your earliest memory?
Okay, I don't have lots of early memories, which apparently is a good thing. This means lots of my early childhood was like happy, nothing to shock the system. But I was thinking about it, and an early memory, I think from when I was about 3 or 4, is when, can't quite remember all the circumstances, but I had been at a playground and somebody like older was messing around and like followed like me and my siblings home on a motorbike to like where we lived. I lived in Peterborough at the time, and it was quite scary and shocking. And I remember my mum, like, she was fearless in like holding them to account. She was like polite and firm, but it sounds weird, but like that accountability and that fearlessness to call out something that was wrong and be like, this is why you shouldn't have done that. I really remember that. And I think it was just a bit of my mum and like justice, and that's not fair. It made me feel safe, but it also like really made it clear to me like the role of like being fearless and calling out things that are wrong.
Yeah, calling out things that are wrong, and maybe boundaries as well, like where the boundaries are, and knowing and saying. Oh, it's funny that stuck with you, isn't it? I mean, I understand why.
Yeah, it's really funny because there isn't like lots of memories from that time, but yeah, just that fear and then that safety, but not like brushing it under the carpet.
Yeah, so it's a positive memory.
Yeah, like I think it is.
In a funny way.
No, it is a positive memory because I think it really represents like my mum and like standing up for what's right.
Totally makes sense. And so you had siblings, you grew up in Peterborough. Tell us a bit more about your early life.
Yeah, so we moved like around a little bit for work. I probably don't sound like I'm from Peterborough as I'm talking. So I think I lived in Peterborough till I was 4, but then we moved to West Yorkshire. And so like most of my kind of from about 4 to 18 was in West Yorkshire, and then my parents moved again. So I've got an older sister and a younger brother. And my early life, I was thinking about this for this podcast. My early life was really rich. Kind of like my parents were very actively involved in the community. So my early life was very kind of meeting like people from all walks of life, and like that role of being active, like helping your neighbour, and through that helping yourself was really kind of rooted in that. My mum was a teacher. My dad was a youth worker. He later became a lecturer for mature students, and later still became a priest, like an Anglican priest in my teenage years. And they ran a youth group on the side. My mum taught adult literacy in the evenings. I used to sit at the back of the class. So it was a very kind of active life and full of opportunity. And I was thinking one of the things that I got from my childhood was this belief in like a no limits agenda. Like I could do and be anything.
So they gave you the confidence to feel that way.
They gave me the confidence to feel that way, but that it couldn't be at the expense of other people. So there was this core foundation in fairness and in justice, in like hope and care. But also that I could do like anything that I wanted. And yeah, so I think kind of like access to opportunity. We had some challenges when I was growing up from a financial perspective, which we had to navigate. But like I always felt safe, but in helping others, you help yourself. And I think that and kind of like faith, like my parents were quite active in the church, but in a very like community orientated way, kind of that you help a neighbour principle. And so I think that was really important as well, kind of standing up for what is right.
Sounds like you've got a lot of respect for your parents, or as you look back, you have a lot of respect.
No, definitely. They're very different, but they were a really good team. And it was like you take your head and your heart to any situation, but you also do the difficult things because it's got to be about making positive change. And so that like community roundedness, like how do you disrupt the status quo, but in a positive way? How do you take people with you? Like, definitely really like important foundations.
And how do you think that's informed? I mean, you've obviously thought about this, and how has that informed the choices you made then? And obviously I've looked at your career, you've held lots of different positions, but all within a similar space. And also just thinking about the youth element as well, because there's a thread there, isn't there? So how do you think it informed your choices when it came to your career, your education, and so on?
I think it's a really good question. I think I always assumed kind of that the world can be a better and fairer place, and that we have an obligation to do what we can to like make the world a fairer place. And I think that was intrinsic in my upbringing. And actually, like, me and my siblings are all in what I would consider like the helping professions. My sister's a head teacher. My brother kind of is a nurse. So there's a theme. I left public sector and moved to the non-profit sector. So there's a shift. And so I think that was really important, but also that something really important in my childhood, and actually is a thread in my career, is I think I grew up in an environment which is like every individual is uniquely talented and has power and agency, but like the world isn't as fair as it should be. And so some people have access to that agency and to fulfill their potential, and other people need help to unlock their potential so they can thrive, but on their own terms. So not in that kind of old way, like, you know, I think the old image of charity can be quite patronizing. Let me like help somebody who has less. Not that, like, we are equal, but we need to like help some people unlock their agency because life might have put blockers in their way. I think that is really important in the career choices that I later made. And I am very glass half full. Some people might say glass brimming. So like optimistic, I guess, is a way. Like, I'm naturally optimistic, but even when the world can put blockers in your way, I think like change is possible, and we have to push through kind of to deliver that. And if like you create greater equality, I think it makes everybody happier overall.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant way to articulate the definition of where charity should be in the sector at the moment. I really like the definition, and I like the positive outlook. I always think it's really interesting to understand how people can continue to feel positive when the fight is long and hard. You've had a long career already. How do you personally stay glass half full?
Yeah, thinking as I've said that, I think some of my colleagues would say I'm more than half-hearted. Like, I am a naturally kind of energetic and enthusiastic person. I think obviously the world is very complicated and difficult right now, and in some aspects depressing. Like, it's impossible not to have that outlook. But there are lots of phenomenal acts of kindness that are happening right now, like while we're having this conversation. And so to me, it is like putting things in context. And that ability to take a step back, to not kind of get overwhelmed and look at, I might not be able to change this situation over here, but maybe I can make a positive act over here. And to remember that it's not just the big things, the small things do matter. I can never get the quote right, but, you know, there's a famous quote, I will not quote of it, Margaret Mead, and she says something along the lines of, don't forget that, you know, acts by a small group of like people changes the world. It's the only thing that ever has. So it's this idea. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why I'm at Fairtrade today, because you want to create a system level change, but also on an individual basis, you can make that positive act every day by buying Fairtrade. And I think that really matters. I don't know, I was literally talking to my team yesterday about Gaza and kind of how people feel with the famine that is happening there. And you can feel helpless, like aid is not getting through, and people need care, kind of. But, you know, there's also terrible situations happening in like Sudan. And we know that we're almost at the year anniversary of far-right riots in the UK. And there are people like here that need our help. And so you have to keep giving. So I think that has also kept me very positive. Yes, I'm a leader in the charity sector, but I continue to donate. I continue to give my time. And therefore you see like wonderful acts and you see people thriving and developing. And I think you need to be able to hold that complicated world in your head, and kind of maybe you can't change an education system today, but you can help, like on an individual level, people get the access to kind of quality tuition that they need in order to do better at school. And so you work on those things that kind of at the same time. That is a long answer, but I hope it makes sense.
No, I totally understand. I was just wondering, as you're saying it, do you think this is the only way you can think? Like, to do life, this is the gear you're in. Because you can hold those two things, you can see those, but this is intrinsically who you are, somebody that will want to see that and will want to action that and will want to be part of that change. I'm saying it almost because it's how I think of myself as well. I was on a podcast and I was reflecting on a negative experience, but actually for me, the only way to be is to see what that negative experience gave me, because I think, like you, I'm a natural born optimist. And I see the opportunities, I see the good. But for me, it's the only gear I could be in. It's the only gear I can sit to do life in. Do you think you're a little bit like that?
Yes. I think that I have a natural disposition to look for the positive or a positive opportunity in any situation. And so my mindset is orientated to that. And so even when I've had negative experiences and really difficult experiences, you cannot be a leader and have a great day every day.
No.
It's just not possible, taking into account everything we've said about life. And you have to take those shocks and experiences, but yeah, you need to reflect on them and learn on them and come back stronger and keep moving forward. I think different people have different, like the brain is a unique thing and people think and operate in different ways. And I welcome that and value that, because I think the diversity of life, we need to bring it in and celebrate it. But it is definitely my orientation. And I know that I don't know how to live without purpose in my life. And so the reason why I've chosen like purpose-led roles in leadership is because I need it in my DNA to keep moving forward.
So let's talk about some of those roles, some of those pivotal moments that have led you to the role that you're in now at Fairtrade. Which are the ones that stand out, and what did you gain along the way? And I was saying this, thinking about our audience. Nobody plots and plans a career, because it just doesn't work that way, does it? You start something, you might think that you're going to be there forever, but actually something else, happens. So you can't map it all out. But just thinking about the people that will listen, what they might learn from your experiences and what enabled you to get to where you are today.
That's a really good question. I will say, when I was about 12 or 13, I did write out a life plan of how I was either going to be the Secretary General of the United Nations or the Prime Minister when I was late 40s, 50s. So I'm not going to make that.
Wow.
Because I'm 45 today.
Today?
No, not today, but like recently turned 45. Recently turned 45. So that's not happening.
Okay.
But kind of that, like, how do I get to a role where I'll have significant influence to influence the small things and the big things? So I kind of had that in my mind, which is just amusing. I did not keep the piece of paper. I don't know where that is. But I think things that were really important, this might be surprising to people thinking like how, if you're already, people have different paths to being a CEO, certainly if you're thinking about being a CEO. In my teenage years, I did like free paper rounds for years. I delivered 200 papers every week. I did not enjoy it, but it taught me about the value of like hard work and work ethic, and it does matter. And I worked in a pizza place for 4 years called Quattro Pizza, and that was phenomenal. And I was very fortunate because I would say we had a real kind of global staff team, like Iranian owned, but we had people from Bosnia as well as the UK working there. And that taught me a lot about global politics and what you hear in the media and what you do not hear in the media. And so I think that was really important. And getting your hands dirty and being willing to do any role that is necessary to deliver like for your customers. And I think customer experience is really important. And then the other thing is like volunteering. Volunteering has evolved over the years, but from quite a young age, I was actively involved in volunteering. And I remember when I went to university, I was involved with, I think it was called the Good Night Sitting Project, working with a young girl who was autistic and giving her parents kind of like respite and free time. Taught me patience.
Yeah.
I am somebody who works at pace and like operating in a different way. I kind of like represented my like students at my faculty, so got involved in like the balance between kind of academia and student expectations. I was involved in a trust, kind of supporting kind of grassroots projects in Southern Africa, amongst other activities.
Wow.
But I was involved in a project which has changed its name now, but it was called the Kenya Project, which involved me volunteering in Kenya, as well as a couple of years of work in the UK, kind of fundraising, training, support. That gave me a wide spectrum of people, kind of learning differences and skill building. And then you said, and that's a long answer, but which were my most significant roles? An early role I had was with the Refugee Council in the West Midlands in Birmingham. And I had a great boss called Philip. I don't know if he listens to podcasts, but he gave me trust and freedom and autonomy. There were clear parameters and we had kind of contractual obligations. So we were helping refugees and asylum seekers. This is like 2005 to 2007. But he gave me freedom to be imaginative and creative in finding solutions to some of the problems we were facing and kind of our clients were facing.
So what was the role?
So I started off as a volunteer coordinator, and I'll always appreciate the freedom he gave me because I arrived and I think we had 3 volunteers and I think we had a contract which said, we need to create like volunteer roles like in the local community and kind of for refugees and asylum seekers. And I said, so I need to create opportunities and it needs to have impact. Actually, that wasn't part of it, but I said, it's got to have impact and we're going to measure it. And he said, yes. And, 2 years later, we had 11 community and office-based projects across the region. We had 55 people regularly volunteering for us. Quite a large number of volunteering full time because like legal changes that meant people couldn't work. And we were working really actively with lots of community groups and we were like changing perceptions. We were building friendship and community and we were giving people access kind of to safety and like building relationships and building family. And that was a phenomenal opportunity. And we had more than 35 nationalities who worked in our office. And that also taught me a lot about culture. It taught me a lot about different faiths. And it taught me a lot about how you can deliver services in different ways in different places and about our instinctual bias. So really valuable. I did another role there. I did a deputy team manager role, helped set up a one-stop service in Stoke-on-Trent. But it was really demanding. It was very challenging, kind of politically at the time. But yeah, that trust and that freedom to imagine differently and to not be limited. That was a really important role. And then from there, after 2.5 years, I went to Kenya to be the director of a grassroots charity called Action for Children in Conflict in Kenya. And, I always say I was given a really great opportunity there because the person who recruited me wasn't from the charity sector because I'm quite a young person to be appointed as the director. But he saw my potential. Even though I didn't have like years and years of experience. And so I'm always grateful for that. And I think there's always a lot you can learn about what the business sector does well.
Yes.
And what the charity does sector. And I suppose my later career has always been blending the business world and the charity world because I think that we can do things. We need to take the best of both worlds. And And that was a phenomenal experience. I slowly grew that team kind of over 5 years. I think when I started, we had about 14 staff. And over time, we grew it to about 45 or 50 and worked with many young people. I think we were working with a few hundred. We took it to about 14,000 over that time. But, there's lots of challenges in international development today. But actually, we made a decision quite early on to shift all our staff kind of from a program perspective to Kenya. So we had both a UK and Kenyan charity, but we moved fundraising, communications, programs, like everything we moved to Kenya because decision making should be kind of with the community and that people in the lead approach. And sometimes we can be well-intentioned, but when we're further away, we don't necessarily know kind of what people's needs are and kind of what is the best way to solve their problems. So really that local first approach, like I had that opportunity. And again, kind of how do you get the best out of people? And also different ways to solve things. I really think about social work in Kenya, and I learned a lot about how you can do social work differently to the UK. We're very boundaried and professional in the UK, and there's lots of advantages to that, but there are also disadvantages, and it can feel quite isolating and ostracizing for people who've had vulnerable kind of life experiences and that more relationship orientated approach in Kenya. So I learned the West doesn't always have the answers.
Yeah.
Some of the best fit solutions are elsewhere. And so I think that was really important for me, and where the wisdom sits, and that there are smart, intelligent people everywhere. And the more articulate you are, the more educated you are, the more access you have to power. That doesn't mean that you're the smartest.
And practically just the experience of working in another country. I mean, all those learnings come from that, but just I can see how that can also feed into the role that you're doing today.
Definitely. And it's really, I find it really helpful kind of being at Fairtrade today that obviously I have spent time with tea workers and with coffee farmers and on flower farms. I lived in Thika, which is very close to quite a number of those commodities, and how people were navigating their lives to give a better opportunity to their kind of children and their families. And that I'll never forget just the impact of high inflation in Kenya. We talk about having been through a high inflation environment over the last few years in the UK. That is nothing compared to the inflation kind of certainly in lots of parts of Eastern and Southern Africa. And I never forget kind of with sugar, having deep discussions. We worked with children who either lived on the streets or at risk of being on the streets. And one of our services was a rehabilitation centre, temporary, to help people go back to their families. We had to have discussions with the young people. Do you want to have tea without sugar or less tea each day? Because it was 120% inflation on sugar, and kind of having that active decision making with the young people. And they were like, actually, we'd rather have less tea than tea without sugar. And I think sometimes we don't think about that in kind of when we're buying kind of products here, and just the lack of fairness in that trade system. So certainly that was very powerful in how you navigate that when you're trying to help people to access education, access healthcare, and gain kind of, gainful employment. A lot of employment is not salaried in somewhere like Kenya. So how do you help people to run their own businesses effectively and not get undermined by inflation?
So there's still a gap between that role and where you are today. What were the other highlights or pivotal moments that led you, do you think, to the role today?
So a couple of things. I just came back from Kenya in kind of I'm going to say 2012. And I took on a role at Global Giving, which it was the first ever crowdfunding platform before we'd ever heard of crowdfunding. It started in 2002, but it was all about disrupting philanthropy. And obviously today I'm trying to disrupt, the trade market. And so it was about disrupting philanthropy and saying traditional aid doesn't work. We need to use technology and put more power in the hands of the leaders of grassroots organisations anywhere. And even though we're well-intentioned, lots of our infrastructure in development takes precious resource before it gets to the ground. And so I think what running that platform taught me was, using technology to do good. And how do you use power and learning to build peer learning networks, help people fail faster. We all fail. Let's talk about it more. Lots of people who say they're doing unique work. It's not that unique. Sometimes it is, but a lot of the time we're doing similar work to other people. So connect those people, learn from them, do it better, measure your impact, because when resources are limited, do the things that kind of lead to the step change, but also working with business and finding ways to encourage business to also disrupt how they operated with the charity sector. So I think that role gave me that platform opportunity, that disintermediation, but also how do you nudge business forward as well as nudging kind of practice on the nonprofit side. And then I was there for 6 years. I helped take us through an operational merger to kind of scale our impact. And I think probably from that role on, I was thinking, how do you deliver impact but really take it to scale so you can see a greater change kind of in our global system? After I'd done that operational merger, I did a fantastic interim role with an organisation called Safe Passage. I've got to give them a shout out, who do strategic litigation and advocacy and community organising to create safe routes for child refugees so that they don't have to get on boats, so that they don't disappear kind of en route, kind of having fled kind of civil war and other conflict. That was really good as a leader in reopening kind of a different toolbox. I was running we had offices in France and Belgium and Greece as well as the UK, and just reopening my toolbox and how do we move forward? And I helped take them through a demerger, another skill in the toolbox, but also, how do we build sustainability for the long term? But then I didn't want to travel kind of after that because I had a young family. And so I was then fortunate. It might seem different for people. I went to an impact funder, which is called Impetus. And so that is focused again on young people, as I had been in Kenya, and focused again on education and employment outcomes, but really looking at that unrestricted funding, because we too often tell people how to spend money and we need to trust the people who are running organizations. Investment expertise, how do you help people to do the best quality work with the resource? And how do you lift education and employment outcomes for the most vulnerable people in the UK? And that gave me a really, it took me even further in my thinking around impact and growth and how you scale both organizations and interventions, which are not the same things. And I think we have to remember that as social impact leaders. Scaling your organization is not always the answer, but scaling the intervention can be. And that's really brought me to today, because I am naturally both a local but also a global person. And so when I saw the opportunity for Fairtrade, it hadn't come up for 12 years. I had been keeping an eye. I was a long-time supporter of Fairtrade. I was involved in early kind of stalls in the 1990s as a teenager with my family. I was fortunate to work for a community organising charity in the early 2000s, doing one of the early fair trade towns in Wrexham. And so just that mixture of trying to help business to do better. So take the status quo, make it better, secure kind of supply chains for the future, but also disrupt the system and the connection between the individual act of buying fair trade, kind of community work to make schools, businesses fair trade, but then also on that business side and bring the best of those two together to say, can we deliver a better fair trade system? That means people get better incomes and wages, better working conditions, and they are able to have the means in which to have kind of achieve potential on their own terms. So you're not telling people what to do. That classic principles of solidarity, that's really what brought me to fair trade. And I do believe kind of if people have a decent income and decent working conditions, we spend so much of our lives at work, that gives people the means with which to live good lives. And so I feel like I've landed at 45 in my dream job.
Yeah, I can see how you've acquired all the skills necessary along the way. It's like you talked about toolbox, but it's like you've been adding all the way along, and there are definitely themes and threads, aren't there, through your whole career. Tell us a bit more about the process, though, like seeing, I mean, how does that opportunity arise? What does the interview process look like? How did you feel along the way? Did you feel that this was yours and that this was a role that you were going to definitely win? Or what was it like? Give us some insight.
That's such a good question. I had thought before, so I left Impetus last summer. I felt like so proud of everything we'd done, and we had scaled our work. I suppose another theme is that I have been fortunate to grow every organisation that I have worked with in terms of impact and income, which are necessary in our complicated world. Felt like I had achieved everything that I could achieve. And actually, I thought I was going to do interim leadership because I have a young family. And so I did do like a fantastic interim CEO role. But when I saw this role, I was like, oh, I know I want interim, but this is like the perfect permanent role. So I think, number one, don't be too fixed in what you will and will not do. Secondly, I think it is like finding out more, so not being nervous to ask questions. And so I think what I wouldn't have had confidence to do, even a few years ago, is pick up the phone to the recruiter, find out more, learn more. Are you a good fit? And it's a bit like dating.
Yeah,
if I can say that. It is, are they a right fit for you and are you a right fit for them? And I do think you need to think in that way. It was quite a long interview process. It took quite some time and there was a lot of interviews and tests and others. But you are finding, especially as you get further on in your career, is there the right mindset in your board and in your senior team for you to deliver the level of ambition that you have? Because I am an ambitious person and I love what Fairtrade has achieved over the last 30 years. But we have to build a future fit food system for the next 30 years. And with climate change and kind of Trump tariffs and kind of economic crisis, there's a lot to do. And so I needed to know that there was sufficient level of ambition. And so they're interviewing you, wanting to know about your expertise and others, but you're also sounding, do we have the same vision in mind and are we aligned? And I certainly think also with the chair of your board and kind of with you, like, are you going to work well together? Are they going to stretch you and challenge you? And are you aligned kind of in where you see you want to be in the next 3 years? So obviously there's lots of kind of interviewing and practice and others, but I think also asking for feedback and thinking about that and learning and not feeling that it's not about giving the perfect answer because there's never a perfect answer, but being like honest. And I find interviews are false processes, and I feel this more and more, but just trying to evidence what you mean. I talk too much in interviews, just like this podcast. So no. I know that about myself, so I have to kind of prepare for that.
Yeah, and I'm always in awe of the responsibility that comes with roles like this. When you were going through the process, so you sound really confident and you are really ambitious. And I understand that thing about the people around you, can they deliver on it? But are you ever overwhelmed with the responsibility? Like even when you're going through that process, did you just feel like, oh, I can do this, with the right team around me, the right leadership team, I'll be able to do this? Or do you ever doubt yourself? Or how does it feel to have such a responsible role?
It is a lot of responsibility and, the role exists to like deliver on the mission. And so it has to be, can I really make a step change to that mission? And I know I sound really confident. I'm not always confident, but if you're not willing to trust yourself, it will be impossible for other people to trust you. So did I have self-doubt in the process? Do I have self-doubt in like my leadership? Yes. I think doubt kind of is important, as is humility. But I do think it's really important. You have to trust yourself. You have to trust your instinct. And that doesn't mean that you should be arrogant. Definitely not. Do you always have the right answer? No. But that willingness to learn and to be curious always, and to listen not just to the people that are free with their views, but the people who are not contributing, that can help you to deliver. And if people are still feeling, I have self-doubt, so I can't put myself forward, there are some shocking leaders around. So put it in context. There are some leaders today who I don't think are doing a very good job. If you believe that you can do a better job than them, put yourself forward.
Yeah, do it. I think looking back over everything you've just said about your career, the thing that stands out to me is something you did very early on, and the thing that I wish I'd known, which was around the volunteering. I think acquiring things before your first formal permanent role is really important. It's a bit like, and it's not supposed to be like this, I know you did it for all the right, but it's like getting a head start. And because it's around that skill acquisition and that broadening of your understanding of the world. I think I have a 13-year-old daughter and a son, 10-year-old son, and the thing I'll be saying to them is volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. So I think that's really good advice. You talked about your family a little bit. You've touched on that you're a mum. Can you tell us how that's been on your leadership journey as well? How have the two sat together?
I mean, it's been challenging. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. So pretty little.
Yeah.
So I come to you today as a tired parent. My 3-year-old shouted at 4:34 this morning, I want to see Janet and Bill, after I took him to the theatre on Friday to see the Smeds and the Smooths. So it's been hard work.
Yeah.
I would say that being a parent and a leader has challenged me. Like in good ways, but I'm not the leader. I'm a different leader. I think that I've got greater depth of empathy, a greater understanding of like the juggle. I think I appreciated it, and I was always a very supportive, flexible employer, trying to find ways for kind of parents to progress into management positions, even when they were like having kind of caring responsibilities in previous roles. But I think like you're more compromised. And I think it's okay to be compromised, but I think if you were a leader that has progressed because you gave it your all, you gave it your 150%, once you're like a parent or somebody with caring responsibilities, like I do think you're more compromised. I don't think that's a bad thing to be. So this is not to put anybody off. You can absolutely do it, and it can make you a better leader. But you do have to be more boundaried. And so, today I do a 90% role over 4 days. And I have found ways to really be very focused and like present in my work, but then like to force myself to switch off, not be near devices in order to be fully present with my children. Because I will also fail if I look back and I gave everything to my work, but I didn't give everything to my children. And your children also need the best of you. So yes, you should be creative and imaginative at work, but you also need it with your children. And I would say a useful piece of advice, which I'm stealing from a book that I'm reading at the moment called How to Build Your Feminist Son. I'm close to it. It's by an Indian professor. She talks about building your village. And I think nailing leadership and parenting is about building a village of support. And even though they don't live nearby, my parents, my mother-in-law, kick-ass awesome. And I didn't with my first son, but now with my young son, I have a nanny who works 4 days a week. And she is also awesome, called Nicola. But they give me, and my sister, like they provide a level of support for me not to hold myself back, because I want to give it all my all, and you need to ask for help. So I'd say trust your team, give opportunity, don't hold everything yourself. And you're going to have good and bad days, and be open about that with your team, and also be really proactive and mindful as a leader in supporting other people in your organisation who have caring responsibilities, and make sure that you're encouraging them to invest in their training and development, like if there's coaching opportunities, or just making sure that they feel safe and secure on kind of parental leave. I think those things really matter. So don't just think about yourself. You are a leader. So also think about what you're role modelling to the people in your team. It is my third attempt, I should point out, at trying to do a 4-day week. I feel like on my third time, I'm nailing it. but it took me a while to put in my own boundaries.
Yeah, that's great. I think the thing about the role modelling, I mean, you can speak about all of these things, you can say what the intention is, but if you're just doing it and showing it, then that's the best way for people to believe that it can be done.
Yeah, and it can be done. And like there are really great like learning and support networks now kind of for leaders with children. And I say other caring responsibilities. I'm conscious, with problems with social care, there are more and more people who've got elderly caring responsibilities as well. But there are different leadership models and structures. So whilst I haven't done it myself, I have colleagues who've done co-leadership models, which I also think can be exciting. And you can also think like, what is right for you right now? So I certainly thought deeply, did I want to be a CEO after I'd had my young children, or did I want to take a break from that? Turned out my DNA is also to lead. And so therefore I decided on that path, but there's nothing wrong with also taking a step back for a while and doing it differently. So people shouldn't have fear.
Yes. And then we just need to surface all those different stories around how it can look. I mean, that's part of this podcast. We had Ariba from Greenpeace on here, and she's doing exactly where it's a shared role, for whatever reason, but that they do that, her and Will. So there's lots of different ways, as you say, to be a leader today. That's really important. Let's go back to Fairtrade, and let's talk a little bit about how things are today and what the vision is for the next few years. What are your aims and objectives?
No, really good. And we're actually live doing our strategy at the moment. I feel really fortuitous to have arrived at this time as a leader. So we work with about 2 million farmers today in about 1,900 producer organisations. So I'd say Fairtrade today, it's in a good place, but it's also in a challenging place. So we have some fantastic kind of brands and retailers who work with us on that vision, which I've talked about before. So better incomes and wages, better working conditions, and putting power back in the hands of farmers and workers to be able to support their families and thrive on their own terms. But you've got climate crises, you've got economic volatility with tariffs and beyond, and you've also got a lot of kind of political conflict, and that all impacts and creates a lot of volatility. I think they, in these technical terms, they say we used to have VUCA, is it volatile, ambiguous, complex? I've done that quite wrong, but like an ambiguous, and now it's banny, brittle kind of environment. So we need to take that as our new normal. But I'd also say taking account of the mitigations we need to put in place, it is very clear that there is a huge disjunct between what we pay in the supermarket for our products and what gets back to the farmer and worker. And that is not fair. And as more and more kind of acquisitions take place, so you have bigger and bigger companies, that actually makes a fair exchange between the farmer and that company harder to deliver. And so we have to look, what does that future fit food system look like in 30 years? So, I've put in tea earrings today just to remind me. But, we're running a tea campaign at the moment called Brew It Fair. And less than like 5% of the 2 or 3 pence that we pay for a tea bag in the supermarket gets through to a tea worker today. It's just not acceptable, and it's causing fundamental issues. And it means we might not have those products in the future. And so I think the opportunity to work productively and also push companies further in long-term relationships with farmers and workers, pooling risk. I think, you asked me where we need to go. We're running a pilot at the moment called Shared Impact. And so we are doing pre-competitive collaboration. So helping people pool their risk, share their sourcing commitments so that more product can be sold on fair trade terms. So more income on that side, but that means that from a fair trade principle, we have a minimum price, like a safety net, but we also have a fair trade premium. So every, tea, coffee, sugar that you buy, there is a premium on that product, which goes directly into the hands of farmers and workers. And I think we are fairly unique. I don't think other labels have that premium on top, because we believe in people and planet together. And so I think that is an incredible opportunity, but I'm looking also at technology, like how do you disrupt the supply chain process, use kind of data so that you've got that meaningful, accessible data, what is working and not working, but also so it's not extractive. How do you put data kind of in the hands of farmers and workers so they know more about the customers and the future? And so that's a long way of saying we know we have to transform that system, and we are working at every level. So from the consumer perspective, and Fairtrade Fortnight is coming up in September. And, for leaders or would-be leaders listening to this podcast, not only are you engaged in that hopeful act of fair trade when you purchase, your products, what are you doing in your business? Do you procure on fair trade terms? Is there fair trade tea and coffee in your workplace? I think really matters. But then on a business perspective, how do we help you to create a future fit supply chain? Because fair trade's quite unique in working from the first mile to the last mile. 50% of our governance structure is farmers and workers. So that really gives us that solidarity principle. And then on a systems change perspective, we're calling on legislation at the moment. In the UK, we were just in the most recent UK trade strategy just a few weeks ago. It's a bit of jargony, but it's human rights and environmental due diligence. And I call that systems not levelling the playing field, but raising the playing field. We shouldn't be doing business in the UK, which is not on fair and ethical principles. And to me, that's a win for the farmers. It's a win for business and the win for the consumer. And my job is to push forward on that change and make sure that we are being market leaders, and we should be asking uncomfortable questions. And we will not achieve everything that we want, but if we keep pushing forward and work in partnership with others, my hope is that people are receiving better terms. Maybe not tomorrow, but in the time to come.
So 30 years in, you've got good awareness, haven't you, of what fair trade is, and everything you've just said now makes perfect sense. So it should align to how many people feel. What's then the difference between the awareness and the conversion of people doing exactly as businesses purchasing fair trade tea and coffee or chocolate rather than, not, or the individual going into a shop and making that choice? How does that differ?
No, really good question, and something we're constantly looking at. We're really fortunate. Fairtrade is the most ethical, trusted brand in the UK. More than 84% of the UK public trust Fairtrade. So that's really exciting. But active choice, it hovers around 26 to 28%. That is really high in terms of brand active choice, but that I can't settle for that. And that is the difference between accessibility of products. Is it there? Well, some consumers will choose certain shops. So they'll be I will shop in the Co-op because I know that there is fair trade product there. Or I will go to Waitrose. I will go to M&S or Sainsbury's. But other people, it's what is nearby? Now, we can mitigate against that. We now work with Aldi and Lidl and others. So you're more likely to have fair trade products in your local shops. So that's one way of tackling that. But I also think people might want to be ethical and sustainable, but I also think people are overwhelmed. When Fairtrade started, there was about 40 sustainable labels. Today, there's more than 400. So you don't always know when you're buying a product. I would encourage people to invest in that fair trade label because of what I've said about both economic and environmental benefits. So we need to constantly be engaged in that activity. And so, Fairtrade Fortnight, we're going to hold hundreds of tea parties with our campaigners across the country. I enjoy people to get involved in their local area because that's connecting your action. From a business perspective, I think it is showing business that durable impact and securing their supply chain for the future means paying more. And in exchange, we can give people that data traceability and that visualization, but it is good for business. If we continue, for example, in tea, a lot of tea is currently being sold at under production costs globally.
That's incredible. I don't think people know that.
It is pushing people into poverty. Recently did a survey of Kenyan tea farmers, and 70% of those tea farmers said their number one concern was income, and only 1 in 5 had enough money to support their family to put food on the table and go to school. That's not what consumers want. And it's not good for business because people won't stay in farming. So it is being really clear. And I do think that we're focused on it, but we can do a better job at Fairtrade of communicating our impact. I think sometimes we're trying to say too much and we don't say it simply enough. So we need to do a better job from that perspective. And I think then from a government perspective, I mentioned the trade strategy, and they're going to do a responsible business review, and they've committed to that. And so I think there is a role for Fairtrade being active in this, in actively making sure that they're putting fairer trade principles kind of into how we do business in the UK. And that enables you to work at the macro level and the meta level. And you need every step in that jigsaw puzzle to shift the dial to a better future.
And as you're thinking about the future, how do you feel about AI and its role in how it could help? Is it to be feared or is it to be embraced as you think about your objectives?
AI is to be both feared and embraced. You have absolutely no choice but to lean in because it is here and it is here to stay. Obviously, there are huge ethical considerations with AI and big data. We know from, a diversity and equity approach that there are huge challenges because so much of big data is inputted, and the data going into AI, you're more likely to be white and male and living in a certain geographic area, and that corrupts the data. And we can see that it has had impact on recruitment systems, insurance decisions and others. So we need to be thoughtful about that and the environmental impact of kind of AI centres and others. But it is here. And so kind of it is moving forward. So you must lean in, understand it, and test to find a better solution. What excites me is I think there's huge opportunities for Fairtrade in making processes not only more efficient, kind of by using AI, but to build quality and enable my staff to reduce kind of manual, kind of necessary but not high value tasks, so that we can be more focused on the creativity and the imagination kind of to push forward. And I do see disintermediation of supply chains, and that might be more blockchain than AI. I think that is a huge opportunity. Shorter supply chains. We are already seeing an acceleration of regional supply chains, but with the tariff kind of market and protectionism that's growing, you should see a greater push to shorter supply chains. That should be in the interests of farmers and workers. So we need to lean in. What is the opportunity that Fairtrade can do in that environment? I would also just say as leaders, don't be fearful and don't say this is somebody else's job. You need to be upskilling yourself as a leader, and certainly kind of I have and I continue to be upskill and understand the ethical considerations, and then keep your brain alive. So it is fine for people to lean in and use AI, but if you run it through to its conclusion, people will stop using certain parts of their brain, and that is a risk. Because disruption doesn't happen in the average and AI produces the average. Disruption happens on the margins. And so I would say kind of brain food is necessary. So keep your brain working. And I really think things like Sudoku and memory games and kind of Wordle and other ways to keep those things are going to be really necessary in how you are supporting both your kind of senior teams, but also your junior colleagues, and how to use it well. I don't think people have got to grips with at all. But you see more and more AI generated media, and some of it's very poor quality because it has not been edited. So take the tool, but make it yours.
Yeah, that's great. And that brain food, is that what you're doing day to day?
Well, I obviously do as I say, not as I do. I do, but it is more because I have young children. I'm doing Sudoku with my 5-year-old and various games and activities. So I hope I'm keeping my brain alive in that way, and through continuing kind of to read and conversation. And it's an interesting tip, but a friend of mine refuses to message me and always calls me. And there's been really good experiments on how having phone calls is a different type of conversation to how we respond to video online, or how we respond to text messages. So he is also helping me to keep my brain alive.
Great friend. And I can totally believe it. I mean, just like being next to you, it's everything, isn't it? Like we're reading each other's body language, we're hearing the words, we're creating different connections in our brain. It's, there's a multitude of things happening at any one point in time. And I totally agree with everything you've just said about AI. I think it's really important that we lean in, but we understand. But I can also see how it could create some sort of laziness within our brains if we are not careful. And so we have to compensate in other ways, in my view. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about that.
Yeah. I think if you want to, you've got to think of it in a mission lens. So I do think there's a risk at the moment. People are seeing AI. I said it was a tool and it is a tool, but you've also always got to think about these things in relation to your mission. So how can it further your mission and how can it put it at risk and how you mitigate? I do hope that the government brings in an ethics regulator, because I think that we should have had it already, to be honest, with kind of the various platforms that we now have. But I think it will be necessary in guiding us to the right way forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. Eleanor, we've covered so much. I'm going to ask, I've chopped and changed from the original questions I was thinking about based on what you've been saying. But one thing I did want to ask was, at this point in time, and I'm thinking about the fact that you've had so many different, you've had different career opportunities. But as I said before, with a really strong thread, I can really understand why you took those different roles and how that helped you gain the next position and so on. As you are today, and you're quite early on in this role at Fairtrade, and thinking about your life generally as a mother of young children, etc., how contented do you feel with this point in time? I know you're an ambitious person, and as an ambitious person, I'm sure you're always thinking about the next step and the next step, but can you feel contented with where you are today? And if so, why? And if not, why?
That is a tough question. I am content. I feel fortunate and I feel privileged. I am content that I have like a fantastic team at Fairtrade and fantastic partners that we work with and awesome campaigners. And I really like that combination. But I am impatient, and where we are today and where we need to be to deliver our mission are not quite the same things. I have to be content because I feel joy in my life, and joy matters. And I think you do need to be able to celebrate the wins and enjoy what has been achieved, whilst you're always focused on the next path. I have 2 beautiful children. I have a lovely family. I have kind of friends who care about me. And I work in an organisation where we share some core values around partnership, accountability, integrity and respect. Like really, that is grounding. But like so that is really important, and to feel that. But obviously, I'm also exhausted because I have like young children, and things go wrong. We live in a really complicated environment where people are suffering kind of in the UK and elsewhere. You know, we have growing poverty in the UK that we must wrestle with, kind of incredible like complex stability. So how can I be content with that situation? I can't be content from a mission perspective because we're not selling enough product on fair trade certified terms. You know, we will go back to tea. Only about, we were very fortunate, Sainsbury's converted all its own brand black tea recently. So about 10% of all tea in the UK is sold on fair trade terms. That's not good enough. Yeah, so
we're tea drinkers.
I can't be content because that does not put enough money in the hands kind of farmers and workers. And so it is, you know, that balance. When will I be content? I'll be happier at like 20% of all tea being sold on fair trade terms. I'd be very happy at 50%. I'd probably be jumping if it was like all tea was fair trade terms, because that leads to a step change in fairer trade.
This may be a similar question. What do you want your legacy to be then? How do you want to be remembered?
I would like my legacy to be like with the team, because you're only ever as good as your team. I would like our legacy to have seen a step change in how trade operates internationally. And so my step change should be that we operate on fairer trade principles, that buying fair trade is a social norm in the UK. It isn't, oh, there's fair trade, I'll buy it. It is, why is there not fair trade in this shop? It is an expectation to do business that it is on fair trade terms. And that from a business perspective, that they recognise that holding all the power does not secure us for the future. So I want my legacy to be better business. I want it to be that fair trade is a social norm. And I want it to be that, let's say, in all the fair trade flagship products, 20%, 25% are being sold on fair trade certified terms, because that delivers market access to farmers and workers. That gives them the resource to build kind of resilient farms and to build for the future. And I can only achieve that legacy with your support, with the support of people living in this podcast. So I'm going to put in a quick ask here, but it is a hopeful and ask that does deliver change. So do the small things. Maybe you're working on something totally different in your day-to-day work, but we should still be kind of acting in collaboration with others. So buy fair trade.
I'm backing you. So, final question. We have this book. We've been blessed to have all our guests write their tip for anyone who's ambitious like yourself to be the chief exec of the charity that they work for or another charity. Tell us, what is your top tip? If you can, one top tip.
One top tip is keep talking to everybody and listening, actively listening to people from all walks of life, and really seek out different perspectives, different voices and different backgrounds. The longer you're in leadership, the more you will spend time with other leaders and senior teams, and that is incredibly valuable and important. But great ideas and great insight come from anybody and everyone. So don't get stuck behind a screen. Don't just read what's in the feedback forms. Go out, seek out, and never stop learning. And that is from people who are working in security in different buildings, to reception staff, obviously to farmers and workers, but to people anywhere and everywhere. Kind of never, ever lose that and resist being confined in, and it is harder today in a hybrid environment. You can't walk the floor. Yeah. It's just so important, and never ever lose that space for imagination, and that whatever you do has to come back to impact, because sometimes what we like to do and what seems like a nice way to help people, it might not be delivering robust impact. So as a leader, you also have to walk the line and hold yourselves to account and do the things that will make the biggest impact with the resources that you have.
To your first point, that requires some buy-in from those more senior than yourself. It might not necessarily be the chief exec, but it could be just the leaders within, your manager, your boss. We hold a quarterly get-together, the MOREVER meetup, where we get women in the charity sector in heads of creative, brand, marketing roles together, because I'm a great believer, having worked with a number of charities and change maker organisations, that you can learn so much from one another just by talking. Yeah. You will have walked similar paths and had similar experiences, and it will just expedite everything if we can just get people talking to one another from different organisations. So we created this space. And then we did this feedback. After running it for a year, we asked people how it's going. We know people enjoy it, but, how can it be better? And actually, the difficult thing was that a lot of people work from home, which I fully support the hybrid model, but they need to get buy-in. And they're not quite sure how to get that buy-in to create those 2 hours once a quarter to meet their peers. And, perhaps they're not confident enough to put forward this, can I go and be part of this network opportunity, etc. So I think that it does require some space to be given by leaders and some understanding of the importance of things like that and all the other multitude of things, whether it's, speaking to the beneficiaries, or whether it's just, like you say, about volunteering, or it's just meeting other people at your organisation. There does have to be that space given to do that, because I think it's quite hard. I mean, we're on calls with our clients all the time, and 9 times out of 10 they're sat at home in their working environment. It's quite difficult to break out of that. And as I say, I'm a big supporter. I think it really benefits women having the hybrid model, but we do have to also be aware of where that may create a few barriers to the exact point that you've said, which could help people on their leadership journey.
I think it's a really difficult one to navigate. I actually make I told you earlier, I work a 4-day week, but I go in like 3 to 4 days a week into the office because it makes it easier for me to see a greater number of my team and learn, and others. That is not the easiest thing for me to do. It would be, we don't have any mandated days. It would be much easier for me to do more work from home from a work-life balance perspective. But I have this opportunity for leadership and I need to enable. I think it is being really thoughtful, and we don't have the answers yet. Like, not at Fairtrade, but not at anywhere, to be honest.
I don't think we do, no.
I think we have to be really intentional, and especially as leaders, of how we are creating that space, how we're inviting people in, and how we're enabling people at every step of their leadership journey. Because I'm also increasingly cognizant that senior colleagues, and this is not just at Fairtrade, but in other organisations, they're more likely to want like remote and hybrid working because of caring responsibilities. Younger people, they want some hybrid working, but they also want that in-person time. But the senior people are not as present to give them that organic learning. And how you hold that balance, I think you can have both, and we need to find the way to have both. But we are also working at such phenomenal pace these days. There is an obligation as a leader to slow down and pause and think, how do I make the most of this opportunity for my team? And certainly one of the things that I've been doing at Fairtrade is kind of like blocking out some time each week to pause and to think, are we making the maximum of this opportunity? Like, are we making sure that we are inviting people in and thinking about accessibility and neurodivergence? Are there other ways that we can make people feel part of our family and culture? Whilst also knowing you don't do culture to people. People do culture together.
Yeah. Thank you. Eleanor, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it and learnt a lot. I think the thing I'm going to talk to my daughter about is just that gaining more and more and more experience along the way. So I hope everyone's enjoyed it. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, real pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Leading Lights podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and recommend us to your friends.